Dr. Dasher, to Shimmy, thank you very, very much for the honor of the invitation to be here this evening. And I want to thank all of you for taking time from your own very busy schedules to be here. But I do want to thank you very, very much. You know, for me, it's always a pleasure to come back to California, and especially to the South Bay area, since I was born and raised in San Jose, and to be able to see so many new faces here this evening, as well as a lot of, I don't want to say old faces, but people I've known over a long period of time and with whom I've had the opportunity to share many, many experiences. So to all of you, thank you for the invitation to be here this evening and to be with all of you. So again, as this is the Shinnenkai, kotoshi mo yoroshiku onegai itashimasu. The picture of the airplane and that's a new one for me. I do appreciate it, especially because it's not a 787. But it's great. And you know, people ask me about the airport in San Jose, and I always say, isn't that strange? My parents named me after an airport. So tonight I am especially proud to receive the Keizai Society's Lifetime Achievement Award. Now, given the Keizai Society's mission and the membership of Keizai Society itself, for me this is a very, very high honor, and I am truly humbled by your recognition. Now, a Lifetime Achievement Award by its very nature suggests a life judged as well lived, which may be the supreme accomplishment an individual can receive. So your award suggests such an achievement, and that for which I am very, very grateful to all of you. Now, it is said we should never stop learning, no matter how old we become. And I am celebrating my 21st anniversary of my 60th birthday. So I had a little experience doing that. But being here tonight and celebrating the Keizai Society's 23rd Shinnenkai anniversary with you, I have come up with an idea to reform government that I plan to take back to Washington, D.C. Now, all of you have been seeing on the news and reading about the bitterness and the rancor in the United States Congress, in the House of Representatives, in the U.S. Senate, and especially in the House of Representatives, you know, where I spent over 20 years of my life of my public service. Now, it really doesn't matter who wields the gavel in the House, whether it's Republican or Democrat. The absence of rapport is apparent, and Congress is gridlocked. But then tonight it struck me. Everyone knows that the Speaker's gavel is used to keep regular order in the House. But it is also a very little known fact that in addition to the Speaker's gavel that is used by the Speaker every day, there is a box of spare gavels kept under the chair of a House parliamentarian. And so this is, spare gavels are there in case the gavel breaks, or what is more likely, when a gavel is given to a member of Congress for chairing the House session. And I had that privilege during the floor debate of H.R. 442, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which was the redress bill, apologizing and making redress for the evacuation and internment of those of Japanese ancestry during World War II. So my suggestion is that the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, should take one of those extra gavels and present it to the Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi. And then both of them should take their gavels and lead the House in performing the traditional Kagamiwari ceremony of sake barrel breaking. I foresee a return to the traditions of politeness and fellowship to the United States Congress, and I believe that there could be a Nobel Peace Prize in it for you here at the Keizai Society for suggesting that as a way out of our dilemma. However, perhaps unfortunately, trying to fix the United States Congress is really not the mission of the Keizai Society, nor should it be. You have very important other work to do. And your work is outlined in the Keizai Society's 2013 theme, Redesigning U.S.-Japan Business for the Next Generation. Now there you set out your objective to, quote, underscore the new relationship structures and modes of commerce evolving today between the United States and Japanese companies, end of quote. It is a worthy goal, an important undertaking, and one in which the Society and Silicon Valley will benefit. And I can tell you, as a former Secretary of Commerce and as a former Secretary of Transportation, I can assure you will benefit both Japan and the United States. Now, there is a perspective on this theme that I would like to challenge Keizai Society members to include in your 2013 effort to create these new relationship structures and modes of commerce. Its inclusion may make a substantial contribution given your experiences and knowledge. For most of us here, Japan is an important part of us. I'm proud to be an American, and I'm also very proud of my Japanese ancestry, which roots go back to Shizuoka-ken. My father and mother are both from Mishima, right on the Shinkansen. And my father came in 1902 by himself as a 14-year-old boy. And then my mother came in 1910 by herself as a picture bride. Now, it may be part of our family heritage and influence in our cultural values that have a role in our personal lives, in our communities, or in our business relations. Indeed, our presence here tonight and the mission of the Keizai Society is evidence of a role that Japan and the Japanese people play in our lives. We come together tonight to celebrate it, and yet for many of our neighbors, right here in Silicon Valley, as well as throughout the United States, including Washington, D.C., the beneficial role of Japan in the lives of Americans can be taken for granted. Even in today's globalized society, we as Americans do not fully appreciate the significance of the Japanese-United States relationship. And I don't want to say that Japan is taken for granted, or that the United States the United States is taken for granted in Japan. But I believe that oftentimes the benefits of the relationship between these two nations is taken for granted by citizens in both nations. And the result is that many Americans simply don't know about the impact of Japan. It's not because of malice, but rather a lack of knowledge about the facts. Consequently, we see Japan and its role in the global community undervalued and vastly underappreciated. I believe that those of us in organizations like the Keizai Society should work on changing that, and I think your 2013 theme is a great start. Now, how many Americans right here in the Silicon Valley or in Washington, D.C. know that Japan is the third most powerful economy in the world, or that it was the second strongest economy in the world for many, many years, until last year? How many of our business colleagues know that the United States is Japan's biggest economic partner, receiving 1/3 of its exports and nearly 50% of its sizable foreign investment? There is simply too much myth and outdated assumptions about Japan and its role in the global economy. How else could a presidential candidate like Mitt Romney believe that he could warn Americans not to be like Japan, calling it, quote, a nation that suffers from decline and distress, unquote? Japan has as its economic issues like every other nation. While the United States and the Federal Reserve address the United States economy and the role that the Fed should play, Japan and its new Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, will address what kind of role the Bank of Japan will play in Japan's fiscal policy. But it is an informed American, an informed America, that will appreciate the role of Japan, and in doing so, help the United States take advantage of the Pacific Rim century. In this room, all of us know the focus that has been put on the emergence of China and the economic, security, and political issues that are a result. And Japan cannot and must not get lost in the process. Admittedly, it's going to have to work hard, and we must help to remind Americans that our partner is a powerful economic partner, and importantly, a powerful, democratically governed nation in Pacific Rim affairs, whom, not only being a democratic government in Japan, but also in whom we trust. Now, it is not a mistake that Prime Minister Abe's first foreign trip was to the ASEAN countries. In his first term, his first trip was to China. And although this recent trip was cut short due to the hostage crisis in Mali, the Prime Minister was clearly signaling to the Pacific Rim nations that Japan was re-engaging. Now, as our fellow Americans become more aware of the Pacific Rim, all of us here should find ways to educate them about the important role of Japan and what we can learn from them. Now, this past week, we saw events in Algeria, the death of American and Japanese nationals, as well as other victims from other nations. And then just 2 days ago, Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton made her congressional appearance with her testimony reminding us of last September's attacks in Benghazi, Libya. Now, most of you are aware that I was the Secretary of Transportation on September 9, 2001. Excuse me. I came to my second presidential cabinet post to improve the national transportation system and to serve President Bush as the lone Democrat on his cabinet. And after advising him, of course I had done that after my stint as Secretary of Commerce for President Clinton. So within 9 months, I was confronted with death and destruction and the ensuing years of war with all the heartache and waste that war brings, regardless of the nobility of its purpose. It is always important to remember these events like 9/11, Benghazi, and Algiers, and the innocent victims that they produce. But it is also important for us here tonight to remember, because of what Keizai Society's mission is. Terrorists use evil and hatred, masquerading as religion and cultural preservation. But they only bring heresy and hypocrisy with them, and darkness. Our response should be to provide a light that dispels the darkness of hate and ignorance, and resilience in the face of travail. And there is no nation that can do that better than Japan. Japan can teach us much about resilience. We should remember that while we suffered our 9/11, Japan suffered its 3/11 in 2011 with the Tohoku earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear tragedy. And as Japan is recovering from this largest controversy or catastrophe since World War II, I was struck by what one reporter described as, quote, a national desire to see civility no matter what the circumstances, end of quote. Now I found myself attributing it to the Japanese attribute of gaman. And I see some of you, and I've heard in conversation, agreement with that. It is hard to translate gaman, but it means to keep your poise and calm forbearance while persevering and being resilient in the face of events beyond one's control. But there are events that we can control, and I urge you as members of the Keizai Society to build strong networks as you do through the Keizai Society and at functions like this that will help you prosper and remain optimistic about the work you are doing when you pursue this goal. Now, this week we saw an individual who is of African heritage and Pacific Islander by experience, taking the oath of office for the second time as President of the United States of America. In that event, I see an optimism about our future. It is a future that says, regardless of where we come from, we have a chance to be the best that we want to be. That despite all of our faults, we can succeed with hard work, and that these are the values that we see reflected in American success. Now, how else could a son of an African immigrant who would have been a slave 160 years ago become president? And how could another man be the Republican presidential nominee whose religious faith, Mormonism, only a century and a half ago had its practitioners hunted down and killed in our nation? The stories of Barack Obama and Mitt Romney are American stories. And so is my story. Like theirs, it is marked by the tragedy of prejudice. But like theirs, it is one in which our national values triumph, which is why I stand before you today. As a young boy whose father and mother came from Shizuoka, Japan, and were unjustly imprisoned in an internment camp with my family and 120,000 others who were in those camps only because of the accident of their birth. But later I became a U.S. Army veteran of Korean War and in post-occupied Japan, a democratically elected mayor of San Jose, a U.S. congressman and chosen by President Clinton to be a Secretary of Commerce and then by President Bush to be Secretary of Transportation. Another American story. Now, each of you will create your own story. You have chosen the Keizai Society to be a small part of that story. And I urge you to include educating our fellow citizens about our place in the world today and the good neighbors we can rely on, like our Pacific Rim partners, the Japanese people. And so, in concluding, let me just say, Dr. Jasher, Jimmy, thank you very, very much. Minasama, kono subarashi meiyo no tame ni atsuku atsuku oshie gozaimasu.
Mr. Secretary. And thanks also for taking a few minutes to answer some questions. So I've classified the questions into transportation and commerce related, into general U.S.-Japan relations, into your experiences in Washington, and into kind of general visions in the future. There were a couple of questions about California high-speed rail. So how do you see this proceeding, and especially do you have ideas about how to overcome the economic challenges of high-speed rail in California?
Next question. As all of you know, California voters voted a $10 billion.
I say only one word at a time.
As all of you know, 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, the voters approved a $10 billion bond issue here in California for the high-speed rail. The Federal Department of Transportation has now come up with roughly $35 billion of money, so that makes about 45. Now there's anywhere from 20 to $25 billion still needed in funding given the total cost of the high-speed rail. The governor wants to go ahead with it, and he wants to be able to phase the financing of that construction. There are some members of the state legislature who don't want to proceed unless all the money is intact. And so right now, that's about where the debate stands. The other element being that there is roughly a 200-mile segment from Merced to Bakersfield that is being talked about as the initial phase, and then the second and third phases would be from Bakersfield to LA and from Merced to San Francisco through San Jose. And so that debate, I think, will still go on for a little while. In December, I spoke at an international conference in Beijing. And while I was there, I then called on the Ministry of Railways, the China Railroad Construction Corporation, and the Japanese have a finance agency called ITIC, and the Chinese have something very similar to that. And the minister of their finance agency said, we can finance that easily. And so whether or not, it depends on what the California High-Speed Rail Authority decides to do. They want to do what they call the D-bomb finance. Design, build, operate, maintain, finance. Have one contractor doing that. Now, if they proceed with that, it would give a leg up to the Chinese because they will bring financing of their own. The French and the Germans don't have that capacity to do that, nor the Japanese. And in the case of the Japanese, Mr. Keizai of Japan Railroad Central is really interested in maglev from Washington to New York to to Boston. And as I said to him, there isn't enough money in the world to buy the right-of-way that would be needed. Because, you know, when you have a maglev, it can't be curved, it's got to be straight line. So when you draw a straight line from Washington to New York to Boston, man, you've got some real expensive land you have to buy. And he keeps insisting that maglev is the only way. Now, he's building maglev from Tokyo to Nagoya, and I think it's, 2021 when it will be completed. So he's a strong-willed individual and a proven operator. As all of you know, the success of Shinkansen since 1964, and so they've got a good record. And but I'm hoping the Japanese will get more actively involved. Alston and the German Siemens have offices in Sacramento. The Japanese still don't have an office in Sacramento. They're going to do that. In fact, at one point I had to convince Japan Central Railroad to send to the High-Speed Rail Authority here in California their information about high-speed rail and how they would go about doing it. So they sent over, something like this, stack of paper. The problem is it was sent in Japanese. No one had the money to translate it. So in any event, it's going to happen. And of all the regions in the country, Northwest, in terms of Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, Texas, Florida, the Northeast Corridor, and then there's a Midwest coalition of Detroit, Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul, New Orleans, St. Louis, and New Orleans, trying to work on high-speed rail, but California is the farthest one along.
Thank you. Change the topic a little bit, but not a whole lot. What is the best way to increase attention about Japan in Washington? Attention to Japan in Washington.
Well, I think there are a number of ways to do that. First of all, we have a number of existing relationships already. And, you have things like the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission. And I'm heading up an educational task force for the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission. And we're looking at the whole subject of why are there less Japanese students coming to the United States? And why are there less U.S. students going to Japan? And we just had a 3-day meeting in Hawaii. And oddly enough, it was in January. We had that meeting in Hawaii. No. But one of the things that we did decide on is that we want to double the number of students by 2020 coming to the United States as well as going to Japan. And that means going from 20,000 today to 40,000 in the year 2020. But also that means getting back to the number of students that were coming back and forth in 1990. So just think of that. We're trying to get back to 40,000 as our goal, which is twice the number today. And yet that was the number of students in 1990. So through this educational task force, and I'm heading up for the U.S. side, and the former Prime Minister Fukuda is heading it up on the Japanese side. And we're putting a number of recommendations to try and get this rebuilt. Because in 10, 15 years, these are the people who are going to be in leadership positions in Japan and the United States. And so if we're not doing that kind of groundwork today, and especially sister city programs and other student exchange programs, this will not prosper. So I was really pleased, Mark, when you were talking about Sunnyvale looking for a new sister city program in Japan. And I know that our wonderful Consul General in San Francisco is very much involved in that effort. So again, there are a number of existing programs that we can expand on in order to do this. There are a number of economic ties that exist where those relationships can be built to further enhance the U.S.-Japan relationship.
Quick question. Can gammon become an American virtue?
Sure would be, it would sure be a tremendous asset. You know, when you think about the tragedy of 3/11, and I remember there were thousands and thousands of wallets and purses that were being recovered and turned in. And it was amazing. No loss of credit cards, no loss of cash. I mean, that became the evening TV stories over here. Remember these thousands of wallets and purses being recovered and turned in. And everyone was so surprised that there wasn't, what do you call, stealing out of those, looting. So, yeah, gaman, there are a lot of attributes, I think, about Japanese people, Japanese culture, whether it's, I'm not sure whether it's fatalistic, but in a way, when I think about it, I think it's also part of the attribute that helped us as we were in camps during World War II. Things like, you know, it sounds fatalistic, but shikata ga nai. You know, when you just stepped in a puddle of something, you have to make the best of the effort. So whether it's gaman, shikata ga nai, there's a lot of attributes about the Japanese cultural and civil behavior that we ought to be adopting on our own.
I don't know if this is related to that last question or not, but a couple of people, one person mentioned that you were a Democratic person in the cabinet of the Republican Bush administration. Another person mentioned that if Congress was a business, every member would be fired for poor performance. And given your kind of experience, do you have any suggestions beyond Kagamiwari for improving the kind of, you know, functionality of government?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't concentrate on the barrel breaking, I would concentrate on the drinking. Yeah, people always ask me about being a Democrat in the Republican administration. For me, it was a great experience. And I was not disadvantaged by having a D after my name. My bigger problem was being a Californian in a sea of Texans. And so, you know, you flow with what you have, and I bought cowboy boots, Stetson hat, you know, and but right now,
we saved the Texans, remember?
Right now, I think there may be some elements of I'm not sure I want to call it civility because it hasn't gotten to that point yet. But there may be some signs of House Democrats and Republicans and Senate Republicans and Democrats starting to talk to each other. I mean, what's the favorability ratings? I think Congress is now down to 9%. So, I mean, you know, we used to always joke about, man, we're getting close to used car salesmen. But, I mean, but in any event, I think it's gotten so bad. And you can't let it go so bad that you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So I think there's a recognition in the House and Senate that something has to be done. And that's why it was sort of interesting to me that Speaker Boehner in the budget discussions in December walked away from it, and it was Vice President Biden and minority Republican leader Mitch McConnell that had to form an agreement that they could take to their members on the Senate floor, and with no participation by House Republican or Democratic members. So it was all done on the Senate side, and the House then accepted it. And the interesting part of it to me was the Republicans have a very strong majority on the House side, but there were only, of the 241, 247 Republicans, there were, I think it was 61 who supported the compromise that was finally worked out. So there's a lot of work to be done, and hopefully for the sake of the country, they will eventually see their responsibility to do the right thing.
One last question, and this is really personal. How did you stay motivated and ambitious over decades after decades of government service?
Our Father who art in heaven. You know, the beauty of our system, there are many countries that call themselves Democrats, or not democratic. But the thing that makes our U.S. system so distinctive from any others is that it requires citizen participation. And so that's why over the years I've encouraged young people to volunteer in community activities. You know, when we came back from camp in 1946, we really had nothing. And there was a fellow by the name of Mr. Ishimatsu here in Santa Clara County, I.K. Ishimatsu. He was a Issei, and he was a very, very successful farmer, very successful. And he said the reason that our young people in the 40s couldn't talk to their member of Congress, couldn't talk to the mayor, senator, anybody else, was because we had no access to the political structure. So in 1946, he started collecting $1, $2 from people in Santa Clara County. Then he picked 2 Niseis to go to the Republican Lincoln Day dinner and 2 Niseis to go to the Democratic Jackson Day dinner. And by 1960, I became one of the recipients of one of those tickets. And Mr. Ishimatsu just encouraged all of us to get involved in civic activities. And by 1962, Wayne Kanemoto, who was an attorney in San Jose, was appointed a judge by Governor Pat Brown. And he was the first Nisei to be elected or to be appointed to a judgeship in the state of California. And so that really broke the ground to the year 2012, when we had 17 Asian Pacific Americans running for Congress. Now, back in 2007, Gary Locke, who had been the governor of Washington, and I formed a political action committee called America's Opportunity Fund, AOF, to encourage Asian Pacific Americans to run for statewide office and to run for federal office. And among the candidates we supported early on was John Chung, who is now the state of California controller. So of the 17 candidates that we were supporting this year, 5 were elected to Congress. Grace Meng from New York, Tammy Duckworth from Illinois, who lost her legs as a result of her helicopter being blown up in Iraq. Mazie Hirono from Hawaii to the U.S. Senate. Mark Nakano, the first openly gay person being elected to Congress from Riverside. And Dr. Ami Bera, Asian Indian American from Sacramento. So we're making great strides. As I said, we had 17 candidates this year from different parts of the country. So little by little, we're going to have to continue doing that. And as I see this growth and young people who are willing to step up and run for public office. Or even if they don't run for public office, they can still pursue their career goals, but volunteer to the mayor to serve on a board or a commission, county official, governor, president of the United States. Because there are many positions that are not full-time, but where as you become a subject matter expert, your knowledge is something that would be very vital and important to government, as well as there are opportunities as well in the private sector. So, you know, I just figure, keep your head up, keep looking forward, and just keep going, because the opportunities to be able to do things here in the United States, to me, I think now, are unlimited. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.